Hello everyone, my name is Nguyen Thao from the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies. Today I present the topic of how a global medical crisis affects international reserves, an empirical analysis of the effect of COVID-19 pandemic on international reserves in Southeast Asian countries. As you know, international reserves play a crucial role in national macroeconomics. According to Scott 1993, there are three main motives of central banks to hold reserves, namely transactionist, interventionist, and wealth diversification. And IMF provides a conventional benchmark of safe reserves at 3 months of imports. If the level of reserves drops below the threshold, a country may face economic or financial challenges such as exchange rate instability, balance of payment crisis, external debt, and financing difficulties, and so on. And due to international reserves importance, there is much literature examining the relationship between international reserves and macroeconomic indicators, as well as the role of international reserves in improving the resilience of a country to external shocks. And some of them suggest that many countries are reluctant to draw their international reserve down during the crisis, despite possessing sizable levels of reserves beforehand. And there is lack of evidence for Southeast Asian region during the period of COVID-19 crisis, a medical crisis. And in this paper, I will examine whether Southeast Asian countries actively utilized their international reserves in response to a shock triggered by COVID-19 pandemic, or whether they have been more cautious and refrained from depleting their reserves. By using the estimation with dynamic panel data with fixed effect, an estimation with generalized method of moments complemented by bias-corrected least square dummy variable estimators, I test the nexus between the crisis caused by COVID-19 pandemic and international reserves related to GDP. After running regression models, I got these results. The results show that the crisis has a positive effect on reserves over GDP. This may reflect the central bank's behavior driven by precautionary motives, limited policy space, or concerns about investors' confidence and exchange rate stability. As you know, the financial crisis in 1997 in Asian area showed that the level of reserves equivalent to 3 to 6 months of imports may be insufficient when a country faces a sudden shock. Therefore, many Southeast Asian countries were more cautious about the adequacy of their international reserves buffers to avoid a repeat of past vulnerabilities. According to IMF, the level of reserves of Vietnam equaled 3.5 and 3.3 months of import in 2019 and in 2020 respectively. The level of reserves of Malaysia was 6.7 in 2019 and 5.5 in 2020. These levels seem not enough for defending external shocks. The positive impact of COVID-19 on international reserves may also reflect that the central banks use international reserves as a signal to bolster investors' confidence in the domestic financial market, which in turn helps stabilize the foreign exchange market without an actually direct intervention. COVID-19 was a prolonged and unpredictable health shock that increased the risk of new outbreaks and economic stagnation, putting pressure on liquidity, credit risk, and capital flows. Weak economic conditions forced early monetary easing followed later by global inflation and tightening, adding to external uncertainty. Anticipating these post-pandemic shocks, central banks tended to maintain or build up foreign reserves as a prudent, forward-looking precaution. The findings also show that the lack of international reserves over GDP has a positive impact on the current international reserves over GDP, which means that international reserves decisions are serially correlated. To sum up, during COVID-19, Southeast Asian central banks were not willing to deplete reserves aggressively to deal with economic downturn. The possible reasons are precautionary motives, signaling concerns, fear of exhausting buffers, and the need to maintain policy space amid global uncertainty. These results contribute to existing literature, complementing and extending the findings of Steiner 2013, Azeman and Son 2012. That concludes my presentation. If you have any questions, please contact me by email. Thank you for listening.